Do you believe that a house can remember the pain of the past? That it can whisper into your sleep, showing you things that don't belong to this world? This is the story of a newly bought home and the spirit of its former owner who still refuses to let go.
It all began on a rainy October afternoon when my wife and I received a call. An old house on the edge of a pine forest in Dalat was for urgent sale. The price was half the market value. The real estate agent said, "The previous owner moved abroad and left all the furniture behind. You just need to move in." We went to see it the very next day. The house was nestled in a quiet alley with moss-covered walls, green-tiled roofs, and French-style wooden windows. Everything about it was ancient and nostalgic. I felt it was more like a painting than a place to live. My wife fell in love with the house at first sight. As for me, I couldn't explain why I felt a shiver down my spine. Even with the sun shining through the leaves, the house had something eerie, a terrifying stillness about it. But I brushed the feeling aside, attributing it to the weather. We signed the contract within the week. Everything happened unusually fast. The agent didn't say much about the previous owner, only stating they couldn't live there, so they left. The things in the house, just consider them to be fleeting breezes. I remember that line clearly, and to this day, I wish I had paid more attention. On moving day, it was drizzling. A cold wind cut through us. The house smelled musty, and the wooden floors creaked with every step. But we were still excited. The first night passed almost peacefully, but precisely at 2:17 a.m., I was awakened by a strange sound, faint footsteps on the second floor. I thought it was a burglar. Flashlight in hand, I went to check. There was no one there. But the upstairs bedroom door was wide open, and the window was banging against the wall incessantly, as if someone was pushing it from the inside. I was certain I had closed all the doors before going to bed. I stood silently for a moment, feeling as if something had just brushed past me from behind. A cold gust of wind hit the back of my neck, but when I turned around, there was only an empty hallway. I reassured myself, it's an old house, strong winds, I'm just imagining things. But in truth, from that moment on, everything began.
From that first night, I started paying more attention to the unusual things happening in the house. But strangely enough, my wife was the first to change. Just a few days after we moved in, she began to suffer from insomnia, often waking up with a start in the middle of the night. At first, it was just things like, I hear something in the kitchen, or it sounds like someone's walking upstairs. I even laughed, reassuring her, it's probably just because it's an old house. But then, she started having nightmares. One night, I was woken by her sobbing in her sleep. Sweat poured from her, and her hands clutched the bedsheet. I shook her awake. She trembled as she looked at me. She was standing at the foot of the bed. No face, no eyes, just hair and a soaking wet dress. A chill ran down my spine, but I didn't tell my wife that, a few nights before, I had also dreamed of a shadowy figure standing by the bed. Its back was turned. Long hair covered its shoulders. Every time I tried to look at its face, the dream shattered like a broken mirror. The house's grip tightens. During the day, everything seemed to return to normal, but at night, the air in the house seemed to thicken. The kitchen was always gloomy, even with the lights on, and the bathroom constantly dripped water, even though the faucet was tightly shut. One night, I woke up at 3 a.m. because I heard running water. I walked into the bathroom and froze. The mirror was foggy, the sink stained with water, and just as I turned to leave, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. "Don't wash it clean. Don't wash it clean." I spun around, startled. There was no one there, but the floor at that moment was so cold it felt like my feet were paralyzed. My wife grew more and more gaunt. Her skin was pale, her eyes deeply shadowed. She said every time she closed her eyes, she saw that woman. Her face was empty, but water kept dripping from her hair, from her neck, from her eyes. I started jotting down every detail, every nightmare. I didn't know if I was going insane or if we were both being dragged into her own dream, a dream from which I never woke up. I don't remember when exactly I started waking up every night at precisely 3 a.m. It wasn't because of a loud noise, but rather an overwhelming silence. It was as if all sound in the house was suddenly sucked away. No wind, no insects, not even my wife's breathing. Just a spine-chilling silence and a very soft, steady sound. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking echoed from somewhere in the house. Sometimes it sounded like it was on the ground floor, other times right next to the bedroom door. I opened the door, flashlight in hand, and walked along the pitch-black hallway. There was no one. But as soon as I stepped onto the first stair, the knocking echoed again, this time from behind, from the very room I had just left. I spun around, my heart pounded. The bedroom door was still slightly ajar. Trembling, I turned on my phone's light and shined it inside. No one. My wife was still asleep, but the window curtain was swaying gently, as if someone had just touched it, even though the window was locked. I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe it was mice, or the wind, or just an old house. But deep down, I knew that knocking wasn't harmless. It had a rhythm. It had a purpose. It was like a summons. An uninvited guest. The next day, I told my wife everything. She looked at me for a long time, then slowly said, "I heard it too, but it wasn't knocking." I remained silent. I heard someone walking around the bed, and once I saw someone's hand reach out from under the bed. I felt a cold dread wash over me. That night, I decided to set up my phone to record video throughout the night, a way to verify my sanity. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. From 2:58 a.m. to 3:12 a.m., the image was normal. But suddenly, the screen went dark, then flickered gently. There was a moment, only about 3 frames, when a white shadow glided past the bedroom door. I rewound, stopping at the exact moment. There was no mistaking it. A woman in a long white dress, long hair covering her face, standing with her back to the camera. Immediately after that, the lights in the clip turned on, even though I clearly remember there was no power outage that day, and I hadn't turned on any lights at night. I zoomed in on the screen, and in the very last instant, she turned her head. There was no face, just a dark, empty void, as deep and bottomless as a pit. I dropped the phone, my hands drenched in sweat. From that night on, I knew we weren't just living in a house with strange occurrences. We were living with someone.
After that video, I couldn't sleep peacefully. The feeling of someone standing somewhere in the shadows, silently watching me, never taking their eyes off me, made me shiver every time I stepped into the house. And then I started investigating. Every small detail, the previous owner's name, the urgent reason for selling, the house's history. I went to the local office, pretending to be a real estate agent wanting to look up old information. An old staff member timidly whispered, "That house, it used to belong to a woman named Han. She lived alone. She was murdered." I froze. They found her body in the bathtub, naked, her skin pale as if she'd been soaking for hours. But strangely, the coroner said her lungs were completely dry, as if she'd drowned without water. A shiver ran down my spine. The staff member lowered her head further. There's a rumor that after she died, many people still saw the bathroom light on at midnight, or heard water running, even when the whole area had its water cut off for repairs. And some people who rented it moved out after just a few days. I returned, my head spinning. My wife saw my pale face and asked, "Are you okay?" I was about to tell her, but then I saw her eyes, deeply shadowed. Many nights of insomnia. She didn't need to hear anything more. She had sensed it more clearly than I had from the beginning. That night, we decided to clean up the bathroom where Miss Han's body was found. We tried to make it brighter, less gloomy. When I removed the old mirror, behind the wall was a broken section, and in that hollow was a faded photograph. It was Mrs. Han, standing in front of the house, wearing the white dress I'd seen in my dream, holding a bouquet of flowers with a faint smile. But what was terrifying was that behind her back, there was a blurry black shadow, indistinct in form, but placing its hand on her shoulder? My wife and I looked at each other. Neither of us said a word. That night, the knocking was no longer distant. It came right to the bedroom door. Knock, knock, knock. I got up, my hands trembling. I opened the door. No one. But a piece of paper lay on the floor. Old, ink smudged. There was only a single, scrawled line in dark red ink like blood. "I'm not finished. He's still here." I stood frozen. Who? Who was he? I looked towards the bathroom. The light was still on, and the door, which I clearly remembered closing tightly, was slowly opening. After that night, I started noticing that the water in the house had a strange smell. It wasn't exactly foul, but a metallic, coppery tang. I tried turning on the faucet in the bathroom sink, and to my horror, the water that poured out immediately changed color. Dark brown, then bright red. I thought I was seeing things, but no. I filled a glass and held it up to the light. That wasn't water, it was diluted blood. I screamed for my wife. She rushed in, looked at the glass of water, then covered her mouth, retching. Both of us were speechless. The very next day, I called a plumber to check the pipes. An older man came, examining each faucet and every pipe, but when he reached the bathroom area, he suddenly stopped. "The wall here, it looks like it was taken apart and put back together," he said, touching the tiles. "It seems like someone once buried something inside." I froze. The photo, the shadow behind Miss Han, the line, "He is still here." That night, I alone broke through the tiles behind the bathtub. My wife begged me not to, but I knew. I couldn't live on without knowing the truth. After nearly an hour of chiseling, I found something strange, an old, tightly tied, heavy plastic bag. Inside was a small skeleton, human bones, and not just one. Beside it was a metal object, a rusty iron clothes hanger, and a fruit knife with a wooden handle still clinging to long strands of hair. I vomited onto the floor. My mind reeled. Miss Han didn't die by accident. She was murdered, and more than one person had died here. The killer had lived with her, perhaps a boyfriend, a tenant, or someone she was hiding. The dark shadow wasn't a ghost. It was the image of the killer, the one who left bodies in the wall and blood in the water. After the discovery, my wife and I decided to temporarily leave the house for a few days. But the night before we left, as I was packing, I heard the sound of rushing water from the bathroom. I rushed in. All the faucets were on. Blood-red water gushed out, spraying across the floor. The mirror fogged over, and then words appeared on its surface, written in dark red water. "I told you, he's still here." And immediately after that, a dark shadow darted past behind me. I turned around. No one was there. But I knew this was no longer a dream. This house isn't just haunted by a ghost. It's where a demon in human form once lived, and he may have never left.
We left the house the next morning, temporarily renting a room on the outskirts. I kept thinking that if we just left, everything would end. But I was wrong. My wife didn't sleep. Her eyes were wide open all night, her mouth muttering incomprehensible things. Sometimes, I even saw her standing in the bathroom, staring at the tightly closed faucet. I approached her. She turned to look at me and said in a voice that wasn't hers, "That wasn't her." I was stunned. "What do you mean?" My wife trembled, then collapsed. After I helped her to bed, she lay still, then whispered through tears, "I dreamed of her again, but this time I no longer saw a blurry face. I saw clearly. It wasn't the woman we thought. It wasn't Miss Hun." She recounted, "In the dream, the soaking wet woman in the white dress stood in the bathtub. Behind her was a dark shadow, but it didn't touch her. He looked at her. He didn't kill her, didn't touch her. Then slowly, the woman herself turned around, smiling at my wife. I didn't die. I saw everything. I witnessed it." She spoke in a hoarse voice. "She's only part of the story. The one who was killed first wasn't her. It was me." A chill ran down my spine. We had been wrong. From the beginning, we both believed the ghost haunting the house was the former owner, the woman murdered in the bathtub. But no, there was someone else, a witness, or another victim. And she was trying to tell her story. I couldn't sit still. The next morning, I returned to the house alone. This time, I went straight to the old real estate office, the one that sold me the house. A new employee greeted me, but when I mentioned the house's address, he seemed hesitant. "I don't know much about that, but you should talk to Miss Na. She used to be in charge of that area." I found Miss Na, who had since retired. Meeting me, she remained silent for a long time, then said, "Something happened in that house, but it wasn't one death. It was two." She recounted, before Miss Hun, another woman used to rent the house there. Her name was Lan. She was around 30 and lived alone. She was believed to have disappeared without a trace. No one investigated deeply because they thought she had simply left. But neighbors said that before she vanished, they often heard her crying at night, screaming. And a few days later, Miss Han moved in. It was from then on that the house truly changed. I returned, my head spinning. If the woman in the dream wasn't Han, then it was Lan. And if Lan died first, then who was the one who killed both of them?
I returned to the house late in the afternoon. The sun was a deep red, stretching my shadow long, like a thread of blood. Everything outside the front door was exactly as I had left it, except for one detail. The back door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it like that. I was certain I had locked everything before leaving. I stepped inside. The air was unusually cold, as if the house no longer belonged to the outside world. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't dare. Each step on the creaking wooden floor echoed in the dimness. I could distinctly feel something watching. Going straight to the living room, I saw the old photo album lying open on the table. The pages were yellowed. They were pictures of Miss Han. But the strange thing was, I had never seen these photos before. One of them showed her standing in the kitchen, but behind her, reflected in the stainless steel microwave, was another face, half dark, half light, lips pressed tightly, eyes wide open, as if forced to witness something horrific. I closed the album. My hands trembled, but as I turned away, a creak echoed from upstairs. I looked up. The bathroom door had just creaked open. I don't know why I climbed the stairs. Perhaps I was lured or compelled by something unspoken. With each step higher, my heart pounded like a drum. Reaching the top, I stood before that door. Everything was as before. Old tiled floor, dim light. But as I stepped into the bathroom, I realized something wasn't right. The mirror had been wiped clean. There were no longer any faint words, but the glass now reflected two figures standing behind me. I turned around. No one was there. I looked in the mirror again. They were still there. A long-haired woman wearing a blood-stained white dress. The other was a shadow, faceless, eyeless, but standing very close. Too close. I pulled out my phone, trembling as I tried to capture the image in the mirror, but the screen was pitch black. Nothing. Just then, the shower turned on. Water poured out, icy cold. The mirror fogged up again, and a new message appeared. I was not given a choice. My heart seemed to stop. I turned and ran downstairs, but as soon as I reached the ground floor, I saw the back door was wide open. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't me. Something had just gone out, or just came in. I rushed to my car. As I drove away, I looked back one last time. Through the rear-view mirror, I saw the front door slowly closing, as if someone inside had just seen me off.
I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the images from the mirror reappeared. The soaking wet woman, the faceless shadow, and the words, "I was not given a choice." Part of me wanted to leave everything behind, but the other part was being pulled deeper into this nightmare. I needed to know, who was he? What was his connection to Ms. Han? And why this house? I returned to the ward office, where I had previously gone to find information about the former owner. This time, I met an elderly official who seemed to remember more than what was written on paper. When I mentioned Ms. Han's name, he frowned, lowered his head for a moment, then said, "Ms. Han was very kind. She lived alone and often helped the poor. But she lived with a strange man. Not a husband, not a relative. No one really knew who he was. We just know Once we saw her go to the hospital, her face bruised, her hands scraped. She said she fell, but we didn't believe her. My heart grew heavy. I asked for his name, but the official shook his head. No one knew his real name. We just know he arrived and clung to that house. Every night we'd hear banging and crashing. Some people saw him sitting alone in the backyard, smoking, laughing to himself. I returned, my mind reeling. No name, no clear face. A persistent shadow in that house. I decided to re-examine all the house's documents. When I flipped to the very last notarized page, I discovered an old piece of paper tucked between two pages. The ink was smudged, but I managed to read a few lines. If someone finds this, know that I was not given a choice. I begged, I cried, but he wouldn't let me go. I just want to leave this place. But he is still there, in the walls, in the floor, in every dark corner of this house. The last line was torn off, but I didn't need to read anymore. I understood. He never left. Perhaps Miss Hand had tried to leave the house but was prevented. Perhaps she died elsewhere, but her soul still returned here where all the pain began, because he was still there. He tied her down with memories, with fear, with invisible control. I looked up at the opposite wall. What was behind that paint? What was hidden? I decided I would break down the wall, not out of curiosity, but because I needed to free someone, or at least understand why I was being dragged into this dream. I prepared a crowbar, a flashlight, and a small camera. Tonight, I will return, but this time, I won't go alone.
I began as soon as the clock struck 2 a.m., the witching hour. The entire house was plunged into darkness. I had taken my wife to her mother's last night. I didn't want her to witness this. If my suspicions were correct, then whatever was behind that wall was not meant for light. I chose the corner of the wall beneath the stairs, a spot that always sent a chill down my spine when I passed it, where the camera had once caught a fleeting dark shadow before it vanished. I raised the crowbar, my hand trembling slightly. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was striking at the past of a soul. Thud. The plaster crumbled, revealing a patch of old, damp, rotting wall. I continued. Lime dust flew, and the musty smell of decaying corpses filled the air. On the 10th strike, I heard a crack, a sound that didn't belong to brick or stone. I bent down, shining my flashlight into it. There was something inside, a cavity, a small void. I reached my hand in and pulled out a rotten plastic bag wrapped around something hard. When I opened it, I froze. It was a bundle of long hair, jet black, soaking wet even though everything around it was dry. Along with it was a wooden comb, broken in half. At the bottom of the bag was a piece of cloth, speckled with dried bloodstains and scrawled handwriting. I begged. He still tied me in the wall. He said, "This is your home, forever." My entire body went cold. He wasn't just here. He turned this place into a tomb. No one leaves. No one is allowed to. I immediately turned to run, but I couldn't move. Behind me, a cold gust of air swept through. The wind howled, though no windows were open. My flashlight flickered, then died. In the darkness, I heard the sound of shuffling slippers, slow, close to the floor. Then someone whispered, "You have to stay too." I tried to scream, but my throat was stiff. In that instant, an icy hand gripped my shoulder, not an ordinary grip, but a violent yank. I fell, colliding with the pile of broken bricks. My flashlight rolled away and came back on. In the dim light, I saw Miss Han. No, it wasn't her anymore. It was something human-shaped with long hair, bruised skin, and hands covered in scratches. She silently looked at me. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. I whispered, "I'll help you. I know what he did." At that moment, she bent down close to my face. No smell, no sound, only a whisper. "It's too late. He's back." Behind me, the living room door slowly opened, and in that darkness, a tall, shadowy man, head bowed low, holding a half-smoked cigarette, was walking closer.
I tried to struggle, but my limbs felt nailed to the floor. Each breath grew heavy, like inhaling cold, muddy sludge. The man's shadow was drawing closer, not hurried, not rushed. Every step echoed like the hammering of a coffin lid. My flickering flashlight beam swept across his face, and I realized that wasn't a person. His face was cracked, like a broken ceramic mask, revealing dark, empty spaces within. One eye was intact, staring intently at me, but the other was a hollow, bottomless socket. In his hand, the cigarette stub still smoldered, its smoke spreading a foul odor, like burning hair mixed with rotting flesh. "You know now, so you stay." He bent close to my face. That gaze, it wasn't the look of the living. It was of something accustomed to hell. I felt my consciousness being pulled down, just like the dream of the first night, slipping into a bottomless pit. Just then, a sound echoed from behind. Bang! The main door burst open. A rush of light flooded in. Someone had entered the house. It was the landlady from next door. She saw the flashlight I had left by the door, so she came over to check. As the light hit him, the figure recoiled. He let out a shriek, a sound that didn't belong to a human throat. Then he vanished in a cold mist, dissolving into the wall I had just broken. I screamed, scrambling towards the door. The neighbor shrieked in horror when she saw my pale face, blood oozing from my hands. I don't clearly remember how I got out of there. I only know the next morning, my wife and I packed all our belongings. We left that house forever. A month later, I received news. The house had been bought again. A young couple who heard the price was cheap and it was close to downtown. They didn't believe the rumors. They thought the previous occupants were just overly superstitious. I intended to warn them, but then I didn't. Because some things you only believe when you face them yourself. A few more weeks later, I read a small article in the newspaper. Husband disappears overnight. Police discover drag marks beneath the wooden floor. The wife states, he opened the wall and never came back. I folded the newspaper, not surprised, because I knew he was still there, and that house was still waiting for the next person to open its door.